All right, moving right along to item number 6, our general consent calendar. And just note that we do have a time certain at 1, so I'm not sure how much we'll get done between now and our quick lunch break. I'm having some technical difficulties in accessing Civic Clerk, so I appreciate the driver putting everything on the screen, and I will do my best to get back in the saddle soon on accessing that, so I apologize. Okay, board members, at this time, is there any items that you wish to have removed? Board member Earl?
Yeah, could you have number 2 removed, please?
Okay, item 2, which is our contracts and agreements. Board member Cannon?
I just have a quick question on item number 5.
It's an informational item.
Yeah, I just would like to ask a question about
Okay.
Can I ask it now?
Yeah, might as well. Whatever we can do to move this along. Question on number 5.
Okay,
Oh.
it is our educator annual licensing report. There's a little asterisk at the bottom of the report that says our new licensing rules went into effect July 2020. And so this report will look different. I'm just wondering, it reports a lot of ARL licenses and that kind of thing. I'm wondering how the next report will look different from this report that we're getting in December of 2020 after the new rule went into effect in July of 2020.
Okay, does staff want to answer that question? I believe that Malia is ready to speak, I think. Take your phone. I should know it and I can't remember it, and I can't reference that because I don't have access.
Not to worry. Thanks so much, Chair. This is Malia Hyde, Educator Licensing Coordinator. And the reference to the new rule that went into place is we have categorized, if you look at the top of the chart, it has the equivalent for the new structure, which is professional, associate, and LEA specific. And so those totals under the professional, if were you to add the 4,940 and the 156 together, that would be the equivalent of the professional level licenses that you will see on next year's annual report. The goal is for next year's annual report to arrive to you in August or September and not be this delayed. We had a lot of issues around our data reporting and just switching to the new model, which delayed this report, as well as some COVID delays due to the extensions that were granted in the spring.
Okay.
Will you just give a comment on the ARLs that we're seeing?
Yes, so the ARLs that were there were granted in the last year before that program ceased or began their sunset. So today there are no additional educators being licensed through ARL, and those educators today now hold an associate level educator license rather than the ARL. That was converted in July.
Thank you for the information.
You're very welcome.
And Chair, thank you for letting me ask the question.
Oh, no problem. Board Member Davis? Your hand is raised.
Thank you. I just have a question on the second to last column where it says authorization under the LEA specific license. Can you remind us again what that means? Is that we those or what is the authorization?
So the authorization is in reference to the letter of authorization that the LEA submits and the board approves that is an emergency type of licensing for the educator. And those have gone away and will become all the LEA specific licenses in future.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other requests to have items removed. Is there a motion on the consent? I'm seeking a motion to
I
approve.
move that we accept the consent
Board
calendar.
Member Belknap.
Yep, I move that we accept the consent calendar. Thanks.
Okay, do we have a
I'll
motion?
second that. Board Member Marsh.
Thank you, Board Member Marsh. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar with item number 2 removed? Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, let's vote.
I believe Member Lear's name is on the list, but farther down.
I've got my IT here to rescue me here, so I'm scanning. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins says view. It appears the voting's complete.
Yes, it looks complete and unanimous.
And unanimously, so the motion passes. Thank you.
Hey, I love you, lovey. You gonna go eat some lunch? Okay. Is this your school?
Hey, Scott, there you go. All right. Board Member Earl, do you want to speak to number 2? And Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, can you take the helm for a sec? I'm going to take my screen off. And I've got some people coming in trying to help me on this IT side. So can you follow up on our consent calendar?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to mute and turn my video off. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Board Member Earl, you had questions on item 2, is that correct? Is that where we are?
Yeah, that's correct. I love Scott's interruptions periodically, by the way. So down at the funding and payments, there's $400,000 in federal funds to purchase PPE. I have a pretty good idea what that means. I don't know what the number 2 is, $3 million in federal funds for grants to LEAs for COVID-related costs. Related testing costs. Can someone give me an idea of what exactly is, or will that come before us? The specifics to that, or is it just whatever an LEA decides they need in relation to that item? Is there someone that could give some specifics on that?
Sarah, if she's still on, can help with that, or Zach. Sarah?
Yep, of course, happy to help. So thank you, Board Member Earl. Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives. So the $3 million is specific to an award coming through the Utah Department of Health that the Utah State Board of Education will then provide in allocation to local grants for high school testing. The application process for those grants is very similar to our previous grants that we've issued for PPE and CRF, where it is a reimbursement grant. So the LEA submits a plan through the Utah Grants Management System. That plan is reviewed for alignment with scope and allowable use cases, and then approved, and an LEA must submit reimbursement demonstrating they have already paid the costs related to execution of the plan before the state board can reimburse them. I will also clarify that these funds were a part of legislative allocation of coronavirus relief funds to the Department of Ed and now USBE, and have an expiration date of must be spent by December 30th of this calendar year 2020.
Okay, thank you. That gives me a better idea of exactly how this is entailed and what it means. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. This is an action item. Is there a motion?
I move approval of item 2 from the consent calendar. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you, Board Member Cannon. Is there a second?
I'll second that. Board Member Marsh.
Okay. The motion before us is to approve item 2 on the general consent calendar, contracts agreements for approval. Is there any discussion to that motion? I see none. Please vote. Board Member Newell, Board Member Newell, are you present?
Yes, sorry, present.
No, are you a yes or no vote on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is the monthly budget report. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
Good morning, everyone. Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones with your monthly budget report and discretionary funds report. Also, I'll turn some time over through the chair to Sarah for an update on the CARES Act funding and any questions or concerns you might have. As of this report, the Utah State Board of Education remains fiscally solvent. We're able to meet all of our obligations and commitments. As we approach the mid-year of the midpoint of our budget, I don't see or anticipate any issues, concerns, or anything at all with any of the section budgets. We always do provide a breakdown of those departmental budgets or section budgets, if you will, starting with assessment accountability. And then as you scroll down, this is also accessible by the public, so that you can see by section what the expenditure rates are. And then also by program, we do program accounting here, what the status of funds is as of this date or as of this report. So pending any questions, Chair Cummins, related to the monthly budget report for the USB's budget, I'd like to turn some time over to Sarah Young for her report on the CARES Act funding status of funds.
We have one question, Board Member Belknap.
Thank you, Chair Cummins. Scott, my question is on the amount of money that has been set aside for travel and for out-of-state expenses and so on and so forth. I know that budget could look quite large by the end of this school year just because of the pandemic. So I'm just wondering, what can we do with that money? Can it be encumbered at the legislative level, or can we take that money and use it to do other projects moving forward?
Right. So Deborah Jacobson, our finance director, can jump in on this as well. You make a great point. Obviously, with the impacts of COVID, there's less travel. I think that's what you're saying. There's less travel, and therefore, what we budgeted for, we might have remaining balances in. Depending on, the section budget and, the line items it fits in, the answer to your question is yes, we could at some point go ahead and reprogram that funding. We do it, with you, the board, and then also make sure that, the legislature is aware. That process typically takes place at year end when we do the year end closure and we see what our carry forward balances are. But you make a good point. I mean, if, we're always open to the directors approaching us and saying, we had set aside X amount of dollars for this. Could I use it, for these other purposes? So, we don't necessarily have to wait till year end, but that's typically the time and the process that we follow where we identify, excess balances or, carry forward balances and then approach it, in the processes we've taken in the past. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Over.
Board Member Earl.
My question is similar, and it has to do with the assessments. I have to remind me, we probably discussed this before. I'm just not recalling all the details of it. But the $8.5 million for assessments. What is there leftover from last year? I guess that's my question, or is that, where are we at on that?
as far as the execution of the dollars that were identified for that, I mean,
Yeah, we didn't administer all of that assessment in the spring, and so that's my question. I know we're using part of that funding for the assessments this year, as well as the interim and other resources that provide for us. I'm just wondering if there's a difference in discrepancy in funding there.
I'm not aware of any discrepancy in funding. In fact, I'll also ask if, Assistant Superintendent Nielsen could come in if he's got, any additional information. But as far as I'm concerned, from a budget perspective, there's sufficient funds to meet the requirements of assessment. And if we don't use it, then that would also be part of the process where, at the board's direction, contracting further down the road, that money would be set aside, if you will, or stay into that lane of being used for assessment purposes, or specific to that particular program, or delivery of the assessments. Is that what you're asking, ma'am? I mean, yeah, I think you're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Is if we're not going to do as many assessments, then likely we would have these balances. My understanding, though, is of that money that's budgeted for that, it would stay towards assessments. And as we progress together out of the COVID environment and into what the board mandates as far as assessments go, that money would stay in that lane and stay for those purposes. If Assistant Superintendent Nielsen wants to jump in on this, I'd welcome that as well. See if I missed anything.
Go ahead, Darren.
The only thing I would add to that is we did renegotiate, or we worked with our vendors to adjust the invoicing for last spring. And in total, between our various vendors, we saved, we realized the cost savings, and I'll put that in air quotes, just over $1.3 million into Deputy Jones's comments. That money, is my understanding, will be retained in the assessment budget so that we can cover additional cost in the future related to state assessment.
Okay, I guess that's partially where my question was. So Darren, thank you. That answered what I was thinking about.
Board Member Lear.
My question's also similar, and my question was regarding both, transportation, the transportation funding that the USBE has, the USOE has, and then it seems that there would be greatly reduced transportation costs in some LEAs. Will the board ever have an opportunity to see that? And then I would hate it if we lost, and if it's even the case of losing it from a legislative appropriation, I would hate if we lost it if an LEA was using it to, say, deliver meals or somehow otherwise assist LEAs. Can you just, and I know that you're not specifically responsible for transportation, but you have enough information to give me a little more information about that, or I'm mostly concerned that it's not lost, that we can carry it over, or that we can transfer it among sections or whatever.
Right. The pupil transportation, I believe the pupil transportation money you're referring to is the flow through dollars that we send to LEAs.
Right.
It's based on a bunch, quite a bit of reporting and data that comes up from the LEAs. Obviously, there was an effect last school year, when we went into the soft closures, there was less routes. And then, to your other point, there was some uses of transportation, deliver meals and things like that. So the way forward on that is later this month, we'll be assembling a work group. There's actually a transportation advisory committee, and we're going to utilize that committee to help advise and assist us in moving with the board into the legislative session to address these questions that you have. That'll come later as part of the legislative process that we take, in order to ensure or, allow for the opportunity to ensure that that funding remains at particular levels. But I don't have that in front of me. This monthly budget report is specific to the internal budget of the USBE. It doesn't identify the flow through, but that's a great question. I mean, it's all, this is the flow through dollars, but there will be definitely more information and more details on pupil transportation to follow. And we can even talk a little bit more about that. I can get with Dale. We can talk a little bit more about that when we get to the agenda item related to the legislative preparation and process later here in this meeting, ma'am. So,
Thank you. Brief follow-up, Vice Chair, please. Brittany, can I ask
yes, sorry, you
follow-up?
can, yes, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that to the extent possible, we can protect that money for LEAs and that there isn't some opinion or sense from the legislature that, oh, they didn't use all that money, so we don't need to appropriate money for, or as much money for transportation. I hope we have a good picture of how those funds were spent, and even if they were used slightly differently by LEAs. So I'm just asking for your assurance, Scott.
Well, ma'am, we're subject to the appropriations process. What we are doing though is we are assembling the data and the information that's necessary for us to make a case. Us being, all of public education, the districts specifically who, utilize the pupil transportation funds for their routes and to provide the services to the students. I feel confident that as we progress and move together into the legislative session, we'll be able to justify or, provide, reasonable assurances of, what funding levels need to be retained or, kept in place. As we all anticipate that at some point, we'll return to the levels of transportation that we had prior to the interruption of COVID. So we will keep the board informed. I anticipate that the first look by the board at this will be in your January meeting, at this being specifically related to pupil transportation and the way forward, following what I just, briefed you on, the whole board on, in answer to your question through the chair, that, we're working with we will work with the Transportation Advisory Committee in the days and weeks ahead to get to what right is as we progress together into the legislative session.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, there are no other hands if you want to continue.
With that, ma'am, if your direction, if we could turn it over to Sarah for her update on the CARES Act funding, and then if you could return to me for just a brief report on the your discretionary funds.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. So thank you, Director of Strategic Initiatives, Sarah Young, here to give an update on the CARES funding for K-12. These numbers were pulled on November 19th, so a little earlier than normal, just due to the holiday and meeting board backup deadlines. In terms of just a friendly reminder, so when we talk about CARES funding, there are a lot of subcomponents that fall underneath that broad title, including the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Awards, or ESSER, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief, or GEAR, and then the individual Coronavirus Relief Awards that came through our state legislature, which have been broken out into K-12 Broadband, the San Juan Wi-Fi Grant, K-12 PPE Grant, and the K-12 Coronavirus Relief Grant for classroom supplies, enhancements, and equipment. So we're trying to streamline this and just present it in a more comprehensive fashion. So this table highlights the total award value in the first column for each of the individual elements. The second column is going to speak to the amount reimbursed. And then the final column is then the percentage that we have reimbursed to the field thus far. You'll note that there are 4 award titles at the bottom that are highlighted in green. These are the funding that are associated with coronavirus relief funds and therefore must be expended by December 30th of 2020. So those are probably the ones that we are most focused on with our LEAs, whereas the other awards have a longer timeline for expenditure. So moving forward, we have implemented the CRF funds through grants that were approved in terms of distribution analysis by the Utah State Board of Education. Those grants have all been received, and now we're just working on receiving those individual goods and services. One particular highlight I would like to share is the San Juan Wi-Fi Award. So this was $3.9 million that was authorized to support San Juan in terms of expanding broadband to students and households as determined by the state legislature. The San Juan district leaders have reported the towers are going up and servers are being procured and arrived to expand that filtering service. I did want to quickly just share this map. So if you are familiar with the San Juan area, this map and all of the yellow towers that you see are new towers of service that have been developed and put up in regards to being able to light up the broadband that's accessible throughout the region, really changing the face of how the individual families and students of San Juan School District have the opportunity to participate in remote and blended learning moving forward. So I just thought it was a great visual in terms of showing the progress that they've made, noting that they have until December 30th to complete this full build out in relation to the allowable expenditure period. One other follow-up is with the K-12 broadband grants and the progress that we've made. Currently $5 million awarded for prepayment of services for broadband services for students and households in K-12 for the current school year. The project is expected to serve 34,500 students. I do want to highlight that we have been working with other state agencies on broadband solutions, recognizing that the need for broadband extends beyond K-12 education and is necessary for many sectors, both higher education learning, as well as economic needs in the state of Utah. And we've been a part of kind of developing what you see on the screen, which is kind of the 4 cornerstone solutions for broadband access and affordability within the state. We look forward to providing more information about this as that plan develops and takes shape. But we're pleased to be at the table to make sure that the K-12 needs are represented as part of this broader coalition. In terms of next steps, we continue to reach out to our districts and charter schools, making sure we're very transparent about the grants and the timelines. We've partnered with the Utah School Superintendents Association as well as the Utah Charter Schools Association on that outreach. We're gathering data, as mentioned in the superintendent's report, for state and federal reporting requirements, which we expect to receive from the field in January 2021. And we are working on identified sustained needs for K-12 education that will exist beyond this school year in regards to not just responding to COVID, but also continuing to support the innovations and the flexibilities that our school system has incorporated now into part of K-12 education. I appreciate the opportunity to present this update. There is an appendices that provides further information about each of the individual grant programs. And with that, I would turn it back to Deputy Scott Jones for his closing.
Chair, at your direction, can we proceed to the discretionary funds report as part of the overall budget report? On display or available to board members for your review is the discretionary funds report, orienting everyone to the upper right-hand corner or box. We demonstrate or show the initial balances across the state funds, general funds. FML stands for Federal Mineral Lease, Land Exchange, and Dedicated Credits. As of this report, you can see the remaining balances. As we progress together down into the main body of the report, in the furthest left-hand column are the particular projects that have received prior board approval, with the most recent one with being the bill, with the subject to the report that Chair Belknap will get on the request for building improvement funding. That's the one that's pending. It's highlighted in yellow and will be addressed as part of Board Member Belknap's report back to the board this afternoon on the Finance Committee motion for the board to approve the amount that you see highlighted there. Previous to this, the board did, the last being the Director of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Inclusion position, where the amount of federal mineral lease balance remaining, the board approved that last meeting on November 5th, 2020. So you can see in the furthest right-hand column, we do try to identify or we do identify or provide when the board did approve the use of your discretionary funds for these particular projects. Chair Cummins, subject to any questions or concerns by board members on any of the discretionary funds, balances, accounts, or projects, this concludes the overall monthly budget report to the board.
Thank you. Chair Huntsman, are you ready to move forward or do you want me to keep going? You're here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm still can't access Civic Clerk, but we'll hopefully before the day's out, I'll be there. But I'm good to move forward. There's a few hands raised. Board Member Belknap, your hand's raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I actually had some questions for Sarah. It is actually on her first slide on the distribution of the money, that the highest one was, I think, 32%. So Sarah, is that what's actually been given or actually what's been requested so that we're using all this money that has to be used by the end of December? Then I have another question.
Thank you, Vice Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So in regards to the first column is the amount that has been awarded. The second column is the one that speaks to the reimbursement amount. So how much we have put of that award back out into the field. And so then that percentage is just reflecting how much of the total award we have then submitted for reimbursement to the field at this time.
Okay, so Sarah, on the Chair, may I?
Yes.
So Sarah, on this, I just want to be clear. All the money is encumbered so that it isn't going to be swept, that has to be spent by the end of December or counted for.
No, that's a great question. So is all the money encumbered? That answer is yes. Does that money have run the risk of being swept if it is not spent by December 30th, 2020? Yes.
Yes.
So any reimbursements, pardon me, let me take a step back. For the Coronavirus Relief Fund, each of our local education entities are required to have expended and received the services and or the goods on site by December 30th. They will have a traditional window through January 8th, or pardon me, yes, 8th of 2021 to be able to request reimbursement against those expenses. But that date of December 30th, 2020 was set as part of the federal legislation for CARES. And unfortunately, there is not current flexibility.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear that we had that. Chair, my second question is, Sarah, on one of your slides, it talked about that you're working with the USS, the Schools Association for Superintendents, but how about you put Charter School Association? There are actually two charter school associations. Are you working with both of them?
We are, yes. So really those two entities, or pardon me, three entities, I guess, so thank you for that correction, have been really vital in regards to doing and supporting us as staff, doing individual outreach to our LEAs, because these grant timelines have been so short, and recognizing just due to the short nature of the funding period, we really wanted to make sure that no LEA was missing out on an award because it had just fallen off their radar or they weren't aware of the impending due date. So those individual associations and leaders have been actively calling each of the individual LEAs that they serve, so that we're getting not just people who don't apply, but we are getting very specific waived funds and actionable steps, noting that the LEAs are making decisions that make the best sense for their community, not just they missed a deadline.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we had both associations, Sarah. That's all. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Board Member Earl.
Thank you. Yes, I'm seeking clarification. Realizing in our memo last month, it said $170,000, including benefits for the equity diversity position that was asked for, and understanding that then cleared, that took the remaining balance funds from the discretionary funds of $234,000. I guess I was unclear of that at the time, understanding that I guess the motion was to use remaining funds, not just the funds that were indicated on our memo. I'm just seeking some clarification on that, please.
That's probably Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
Yeah, I can start out to clarify. When we did the memo, what we were stating was the amount of funding relative to what the requirements of the position would be. So the $180,000 estimate, or the $170,000 to $180,000 estimate in the memo was concurrent with or conducive to a director position. And because that's, if you see and you go back to the memo, you can see the justification on why it would, why we needed a director position. It's also captured in the minutes from the board meeting. So then when the motion was made, there was that remaining balance to be used, and that's ultimately what the board decided, was to go ahead and use the 234,000 plus for the position. It's captured in the motions and captured in the minutes that you approved as part of the consent calendar. So that's the clarification that I can bring to the table. I'd welcome Deputy Superintendent Norman to also come in, as the memo was built or created, jointly between budget and programs.
So that money is encumbered now and is in the system of being moved, correct?
Yes, it's encumbered for the position. That $234,000 is encumbered to be used for the position. And my understanding is that the position was announced. I think it might have closed, or I think it closes next week. And so then, whomever is hired for that position would be funded using this money to the extent of that funding of the $234,000.
Does that answer your question, Board Member Earl?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that was clear both publicly and for board members, because I was surprised by the number when I reviewed through this document. And that's why I was seeking some additional clarification, because based on the memo, I didn't understand that it was the balance of everything left in that particular fund. So thank you.
Okay. Board Member Hanson, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I'd like to comment as well on that same item. I believe it was very clear from our discussion during the last board meeting that $180,000 was what was being authorized for this position. There was never a figure of $234,000 that was discussed, to my recollection, in that meeting. The wording of the motion may have had that result, to authorize those kind of funds, but that was certainly not brought up by staff or not brought up in any discussions. And I frankly am not real happy about that. I think we could have been a lot clearer on this. As far as the motion, it does say the balance of funds, but in the future, I would expect and request that balance of funds, if that number is different than the number that we discuss during the discussion on the motion, that would be brought forward and made clear before a vote's taken.
Okay. Board Member Lear.
Yes, actually, I had you read my mind. I didn't think I put my hand up, but I had a further clarification on that.
Okay, what is your question?
I don't disagree. I'm trying to spit it out. I don't disagree with what Scott Hansen just said, but on the other hand, that the amount that is that will be paid to the new director is still what we approved last month. It's just because there's a total larger amount doesn't mean that it increases the amount that was approved by the board. Is that accurate? Scott Jones, did you hear? I'm trying, that was kind of a roundabout question.
Right. So when we request funding for a position, we always provide what the position will cost per year, per annum in a yearly budget. And that's what was provided, was the $180,000 was the amount that would be needed to fund the position for 1 year. And, I understand the concerns. The motion was made, though, for the remaining balance to go towards the position. Now, if the position is only going to be on board for 1 year, then we would only spend $180,000 for that position. Because you'll see later in your agenda, as we get into the request for funding or the legislative process, there's a business case to, request ongoing sustained funding for the position. So, I think everybody's right. We're all saying the same thing, that we started with $180,000 as what it would cost for this position based on what was requested by programs for a director position for 1 year. Then as part of the discussion, it's just the wording of the motion said, use the remaining balance for this position. Now, if $180,000 for the position goes for 1 year from the date that person accepts or retired, that's fine. And then the remaining roughly 50,000 could be used by the position for other things. Or if, we needed to extend the time of the position, we could do that with that funding based on what the motion, that the motion was made. So that's how I interpreted the discussion. I mean, I apologize for not jumping in and saying, now, wait a second, we can only use $180,000 for the position. I thought the process was to allow board members to make motions to just conducive to the process of what you took, which the motion was very clear that all of that funding would be used for this position, that the remaining balance of the federal mineral lease money would go for this position. So if the board is adamant that we only spend $180,000 for this position, we can certainly do that. We can look back on this and say, okay, $180,000 only goes for this position. And then whoever gets hired for that money is encumbered only up to the extent of paying salaries and benefits, up to the extent of $180,000 for a year, for basically a year's worth of salary and benefits and in that position. If we wanted the position to go a little bit further or longer, we could use that additional 50,000, or that additional 50,000 could be used by the position for trainings, or perhaps this individual has to attend some trainings. I don't know. So I'd welcome any further comment from. Well, actually, does that help answer the question, ma'am?
That answers my question. I just and I don't have strong feelings about Scott. Sounds like his concerns are greater. I think we can be done with this, and it can be revisited in terms of amount at a later time if that's necessary.
But I think we need to make sure it's really clear. Our action was to move money, and that position is under the superintendent on the operational side, and that budget for that, I'm talking about budget, that budget has limitations that the superintendent has to stay within that budgeted amount. And that's what I recall, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, if I'm wrong, we moved money from one place into the operational space to support a position, a request from the superintendent to bring back that position. So it has a ceiling and limitations on it as a limited funding source, and that's it, unless something else changes. So we still have quite a few hands up. We have staff. Superintendent Norman.
Hi, Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement. I just wanted to call the attention. I know that not everyone can see the chat, so I wanted to be able to make sure everyone heard it, which is that the position was announced to fit within under that 180,000 with benefits and salary and everything included in it. So that is the objective of staff, and putting it in there is under that 180,000.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Board Member Earl. Your hand's still up.
Yes, I'm seeking an additional clarification, and the reason why I was confused by this is because I was under the understanding we were using it from the remaining funds. Not all the remaining funds were going to be going there. So that's where I think the confusion was, and there was no discussion of $234,000. So Scott, I'm just seeking another question. Maybe someone else can answer this. So you're saying that the $54,000 additional dollars could be used by this individual, not necessarily for this position, at their discretion for other uses. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. You know, it might help. Could we pull the minutes up and show the motion? The motion was very specific that all of this money would, the remaining balance, which at the time was $234,000, would go to this position. And I, you know, and I understand that. That's so yes, you know, where Deputy Superintendent Norman is saying the position was announced at $180,000. That's what we're budgeted for 1 year. So the remaining balance, to me, by way of the motion, means that that money belongs to that position, or is, to Chair Huntsman's point, that money was moved from your discretionary account under I believe this position reports to Deputy Superintendent Norman. So that's basically her budget. It goes into her budget to fund the position at $180,000 per year, with the remaining balance, or the entire, you know, 180 of the 234 going for the position. And then that remainder of that money they can use at their discretion, either to continue to fund the position or use it for training or other purposes. So if we miss that and we need more clarity, and we only say that, you know, the board authorized $180,000 for the position for 1 year, and move that difference between 234 and 180 back into your discretionary account, then we would need that, you know, I just like that clarity. I mean, is that what the intent is? Is the intent was that there's only be $180,000 for this position, period, and that none of the other funding would be used at all for this purpose, or for this position, or by the position? Because I think that's what you're asking, right, board member?
That is what I'm asking. I just am asking if that additional $54,000
right
wasn't really discussed at all, can be. And I understand the numbers were there. I understand the language was there, but there was no discussion about that can be used for other purposes. So it sounds like that is the case. Thank you.
Yeah,
that is what the motion is on the screen.
And we said, you know, that was the proposed motion. And then if you look at the result of the motions, it followed, you know, it wasn't specific that, you know, approximately $180,000, but the remaining balance was moved over in accordance with what was put in by staff as the recommended motion. That the 234, 150, 155 would go using the remaining balance of federal mineral lease funds in the USB's discretionary fund account, and that approximately $180,000 would go for the position. So that implied that the difference between 234 and 180 would belong in the budget as well for that use. So.
Okay. Board Member Hanson, your hand's raised.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that word implied that Deputy Superintendent Jones just used is probably the thing that's the issue that I have. And we had quite a robust discussion about this position and the money allocated to it. Deputy Superintendent Norman was quite clear that $180,000 was the amount for salary and benefits. We also had a discussion about the fact that this was funding that would only carry the position for 1 year, and they would have to look for additional funding if the position was to proceed for more than 1 year. I understand that with the wording of the motion, if I was to go back and check the balance of that discretionary fund, that would be allocated, but that certainly wasn't discussed at any point to my recollection, at any point in our discussion. And I think when the vote was taken on the motion, I would venture to say that our board members all understood that they were allocating $180,000 for this position, and that any further funding would be subject to another allocation or some other process as we fund next year. I think it would be proper for us to throw that $54,000 or whatever it is back into the discretionary fund And then if we want to use it for this position, take a vote to do that rather than have it occur on this kind of a, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. I think that it could have been pointed out, it wasn't, but I don't think the understanding of the board was that that $54,000 was allocated to this position. If we want to allocate it to it, I think a separate vote of the board, an additional vote would be the appropriate thing to do.
So Board Member Hanson, if you want, and you have more than one board member want to put this back on the agenda, you certainly can, but in almost every, I don't know of any position that we have, and maybe Superintendent Scott Jones, we can keep everything in the right context. That is every position that we have at USBE, not we, it's the superintendent and Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. There's budget to support that position, and what I'm hearing us say right now in what you're proposing to do, Board Member Hanson, or if this comes back, is you want to take any other support funds that pay reimburse on miles, whatever this person's doing, is to not have.
I'll respectfully disagree with your characterization of what I want to do. I want to allocate funds based on a clear vote of the board.
Yeah.
Where people understand what's being done. So I understand this isn't an actionable item right now, and we'll bring it up onto the next agenda. Thanks.
Well, there is quite a bit of talk on this, but that's what would be happening to a particular budget, operate on the operational side. So, but that opportunity does exist, and we'll see what happens there with what the board wants to do. Board Member Earl. Board Member Earl, your hand's still raised.
Sorry, I ended up with a phone call. So give me just, I ended up with a phone call suddenly for one of my kids, so I got distracted. This, I guess my point is, this should have gone to a committee meeting so it could have received thorough vetting. It's kind of sad that it didn't, so that we have this confusion going on as far as the clarity, which would have normally taken place within that committee meeting. So anyways, I am in agreement with Scott Hanson on understanding precisely what this is and what it would be used for. So and maybe that's what we need to do, is just bring it back for next month.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Board Member Earl, your hand's still up, but I believe you're done on this particular comment. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, do you have more to present?
No, sir. Subject to any other questions or concerns, that concludes this agenda item, the entirety of the reports.
Okay. It is 12:45. We have a time certain at 1. This is a good time to take a quick break, I guess, and then we'll jump back on at our 1 o'clock, or we'll do our 1 o'clock time certain. Is that how you're seeing things, Brittany? We're quite a bit. I've got multiple pages here, but I think that's what we better do right now. So let's take a break and come back on at 1 o'clock. Thank you.